Sarah Matthews wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished bandaging another wounded soldier. The makeshift medical tent buzzed with activity. Nurses rushing between cots while doctors worked frantically to save lives. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery fire reminded everyone that the front lines were just miles away. To everyone around her, Sarah was simply another Army medic. She had joined the military medical corps 2 years ago, fresh out of nursing school. Her colleagues knew her as the quiet one who always volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. What they didn't know was that before medical school, Sarah had spent 4 years as a special forces sniper. The transition from soldier to medic hadn't been easy. Sarah had grown tired of taking lives and wanted to save them instead. She buried her military service record deep in classified files and started over. Only her commanding officer, Colonel Williams, knew about her past, and he had promised to keep it secret. "Matthews, we need you in Sector 7, called out Dr. Harrison, the chief medical officer. "There's been an explosion near the supply convoy. Multiple casualties incoming." Sarah grabbed her medical kit and ran toward the helicopter landing zone. The dusty wind whipped around her as she climbed aboard the rescue chopper. 3 other medics joined her, all focused on the mission ahead. The helicopter lifted off and headed toward the danger zone. During the flight, Sarah studied the landscape below. Her trained eye automatically identified potential sniper positions, escape routes, and defensive positions. Old habits died hard, even after 2 years of focusing solely on medical work. She forced herself to think about medical supplies and triage procedures instead. The convoy had been hit hard. When they landed, Sarah could see several vehicles burning and soldiers scattered across the rocky terrain. Some were calling for help while others lay motionless. The medics spread out quickly to assess the situation. Sarah ran to the nearest wounded soldier, a young private who couldn't have been older than 20. His leg was badly injured and he was losing blood fast. She worked quickly to stop the bleeding and stabilize him for transport. Around her, the other medics were doing the same with other casualties. "Sniper!" someone shouted suddenly. "Everyone get down!" A bullet cracked overhead, sending everyone diving for cover behind the damaged vehicles. Sarah's heart raced, but not from fear. Her old instincts kicked in immediately. While the other medics stayed low, Sarah carefully raised her head to scan the surrounding hills. There, about 800 meters away, she spotted a small flash of sunlight reflecting off metal. The sniper was positioned on a rocky outcrop, partially hidden behind some boulders. Sarah could see the barrel of his rifle as he searched for targets. "Where is he?" whispered Dr. Harrison, who had crawled over to Sarah's position. "Rocky Hill, 11 o'clock, about 800 meters out," Sarah replied automatically. The precision of her answer surprised Dr. Harrison, but he didn't have time to question it. Another shot rang out, this one closer. The sniper was getting their range. The wounded soldiers on the ground were completely exposed, and the medics couldn't reach them without becoming targets themselves. Sarah's mind raced. She could see 2 more wounded soldiers who needed immediate attention, but they were lying in the open. Every second that passed increased their chances of bleeding out. The rescue helicopter couldn't land safely with an active sniper in the area. "We need to call for air support," said one of the other medics. "That will take at least 20 minutes, Dr. Harrison replied grimly. "These men don't have 20 minutes. Sarah stared at the distant sniper position. In her medical kit, she didn't carry any weapons. She had deliberately left that life behind. But watching wounded soldiers suffer while she could do something about it was tearing her apart. The young private she had been treating grabbed her arm weakly. "Please don't let me die here," he whispered. Sarah looked into his frightened eyes and made a decision that would change everything. She had sworn an oath to do no harm, but sometimes saving lives required difficult choices. "Dr. Harrison," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something about my background." Before she could explain further, another shot cracked through the air. This time, the bullet struck one of the medical supply boxes, sending equipment flying. The sniper was getting more aggressive. Sarah crawled over to where Sergeant Rodriguez was taking cover. She had noticed earlier that he carried a standard-issue M24 sniper rifle, probably for perimeter security during medical evacuations. "Sergeant, I need to borrow your rifle," she said. Rodriguez looked at her like she was crazy. "Ma'am, you're a medic. You don't have combat authorization." "Just trust me," Sarah insisted. "How many rounds do you have?" "Full magazine plus 2 spares," he replied, still confused. "But ma'am, that target is over 800 meters away. In this wind, That's an extremely difficult shot. Sarah was already examining the rifle, checking the scope adjustment and feeling the weapon's balance. It had been 2 years since she had held a sniper rifle, but the familiar weight felt natural in her hands. "Sarah, what are you doing?" Dr. Harrison asked, crawling over to join them. "Saving lives," she replied simply. "Keep everyone down and be ready to move the wounded as soon as I take the shot." Without waiting for permission, Sarah found a stable shooting position behind one of the damaged vehicles. She extended the rifle's bipod and settled into her stance. Through the scope, she could see the enemy sniper clearly now. He was wearing desert camouflage and appeared to be scanning for targets. The wind was coming from the east at about 10 miles per hour. The range was approximately 830 meters. Sarah made the necessary adjustments to the scope, compensating for bullet drop and wind drift. Her breathing slowed automatically as she entered the focused state that had made her one of the best snipers in Special Forces. Dr. Harrison watched in amazement as the quiet medic transformed before his eyes. Gone was the gentle nurse who bandaged wounds and comforted patients. In her place was a deadly professional who moved with practiced precision. Sarah centered the crosshairs on her target and controlled her breathing. She had one shot to end this threat and save the wounded soldiers. There would be no second chance if she missed. The enemy sniper raised his rifle, preparing to fire at the exposed wounded. Sarah's finger found the trigger as she exhaled slowly. Time seemed to stand still as she prepared to break the promise she had made to herself 2 years ago. But sometimes the only way to save lives was to take one. The rifle cracked like thunder in the desert silence. 800 meters away, the enemy sniper's rifle fell silent forever. Sarah's single shot had found its mark with deadly precision, ending the threat that had pinned down the medical team. For a moment, nobody moved. The sudden silence felt strange after the constant danger. Then Dr. Harrison's voice cut through the stillness. "Clear. Move the wounded now." The medical team sprang into action. Sarah set down the rifle and immediately returned to her role as a medic, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen what happened. The quiet nurse who always smiled while treating patients had just made an impossible shot that seasoned soldiers would struggle to achieve. Sergeant Rodriguez stared at his rifle, then at Sarah. "Ma'am, where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah didn't answer. She was already running toward the wounded private, her medical kit bouncing against her hip. The young soldier was pale and weak but alive. She worked quickly to prepare him for helicopter evacuation. "We need to get him to surgery immediately," she told Dr. Harrison as they loaded the stretcher. "He's lost too much blood." As the helicopter lifted off with the wounded, Sarah remained behind with a skeleton crew to search for any additional casualties. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the weight of what she had done was beginning to settle on her shoulders. Dr. Harrison approached her as she packed medical supplies. "Sarah, we need to talk." She looked up at him, seeing questions in his eyes that she wasn't ready to answer. "The wounded come first, doctor. We can talk later." But news of the shot was already spreading through the base. By the time they returned that evening, Sarah found herself the center of unwanted attention. Soldiers who had barely noticed her before were now staring and whispering as she walked past. Colonel Williams was waiting for her at the medical tent. His expression was grim, and Sarah knew her secret was about to come out. "Matthews, my office. Now." Sarah followed the colonel through the base, aware of the curious looks from other personnel. Inside his office, Colonel Williams closed the door and gestured for her to sit. 830 meters in crosswind with an unfamiliar rifle, he said quietly. "Most of our best snipers couldn't make that shot. But you did it like you were ordering coffee." Sarah remained silent, staring at her hands. "I kept your secret for 2 years," the colonel continued. "I respected your decision to leave that life behind and become a medic. But today changed everything." "I saved lives today," Sarah said firmly. "That's what medics do." "Yes, you saved lives. But you also revealed skills that people are going to ask questions about. Dr. Harrison has been calling all afternoon, demanding answers. The base commander wants a full report." Sarah felt her carefully constructed new life beginning to crumble. She had worked so hard to become just another medic, to leave the violence behind. "One shot had undone 2 years of effort. What happens now?" she asked. Colonel Williams leaned back in his chair. "That depends on you. I can try to contain this, classify the entire incident. But people saw what they saw. Your cover as just another medic is blown." That night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. Around her, other off-duty medical personnel slept peacefully, But sleep wouldn't come. She kept replaying the moment when she made the decision to pick up the rifle. The next morning brought new challenges. During breakfast, conversation stopped when she entered the mess hall. Soldiers who had never spoken to her before approached with questions she couldn't answer. "Is it true you were Special Forces?" asked a young corporal. "I heard you were CIA," whispered a nurse. Sarah pushed her food around her plate, appetite gone. She had joined the medical corps to escape exactly this kind of attention. Dr. Harrison found her during lunch break. "Sarah, I need to understand what happened yesterday." "That shot was impossible for a regular medic." "I got lucky," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Lucky?" Dr. Harrison's voice rose slightly. "I've been a military doctor for 15 years. I know the difference between luck and training. That was pure skill." Before Sarah could respond, an alarm began blaring across the base. "All medical personnel to stations." "Incoming casualties. Mass casualty event." The conversation was forgotten as both rushed to prepare the medical facilities. Soon helicopters were landing with wounded soldiers from a major engagement near the border. The medical team worked frantically to save lives, with Sarah falling back into her familiar role of treating the wounded. But even during the chaos of treating casualties, she could feel eyes on her. Other medics were watching her differently now, seeing her as something more than just a colleague. As evening approached and the last wounded soldier was stabilized, Sarah found herself alone in the supply room, restocking medical kits. The events of the past 24 hours had left her emotionally drained. "Sarah?" She turned to find Sergeant Rodriguez standing in the doorway. "I wanted to thank you. My brother was one of the soldiers you saved yesterday." Sarah looked confused. "Your brother?" "Private Martinez. The kid with the leg wound. He's my little brother." Rodriguez's voice was thick with emotion. "He would have died out there if you hadn't taken out that sniper." The weight of his words hit Sarah hard. She had been so focused on maintaining her cover that she had almost forgotten the most important thing. She had saved lives yesterday. "I just did what needed to be done," she said quietly. "No." Rodriguez shook his head. "You did something extraordinary. I don't care what your background is or where you learned to shoot like that. You saved my brother's life." After Rodriguez left, Sarah sat alone among the medical supplies, thinking about his words. Maybe her secret was out. Maybe her quiet life as just another medic was over, but she had saved lives. That had to count for something. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Colonel Williams entered carrying a folder. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he said. "There might be another option." Sarah looked up hopefully. "What if instead of hiding what you can do, we found a way to use both your skills? There are special units that could use someone with your unique combination of medical training and combat abilities." "I left that life behind for a reason, Colonel." "I know, but maybe there's a middle ground. A way to save lives using all your abilities, not just some of them." Sarah stared at the folder in his hands, knowing that whatever was inside would change her life again. The question was whether she was ready for that change. Sarah stared at the classified folder Colonel Williams placed on the table between them. The red stamp marked Top Secret seemed to pulse in the dim light of the supply room. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for it, knowing that opening it would mean crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "Before you look at that," the colonel said softly, "I want you to know that you have a choice. You can refuse this assignment and continue as a regular medic. Your secret will be classified, and officially yesterday never happened." Sarah's fingers hovered over the folder. "And unofficially?" "Unofficially, people will always wonder. They'll always see you as something more than just a medic. The questions won't stop." She opened the folder and began reading. The documents described a new military program called Guardian Angel, a special medical unit that operated in the most dangerous combat zones. These medics would be embedded with special forces teams, providing immediate medical care while also serving as additional security when needed. "You want me to be a soldier again?" Sarah said, closing the folder. "No. I want you to be exactly what you are. A medic who can protect her patients when necessary." Colonel Williams leaned forward. 3 days ago, we lost 2 medics in an ambush. They couldn't defend themselves or their wounded. Good people died because they had no way to fight back." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She knew those medics, Jennifer and Marcus. They had been kind, dedicated people who just wanted to help others. The thought of their final moments helpless against attackers made her stomach turn. "The program is voluntary," the colonel continued. But we need people with your unique skills. People who can save lives and protect lives. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She walked through the base, past the rows of medical tents where wounded soldiers recovered. In one tent, she found Private Martinez, Sergeant Rodriguez's brother, awake and staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep either?" she asked quietly. He turned toward her, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're the medic who saved us yesterday." Sarah sat down beside his cot. "How are you feeling?" "Leg hurts, but Doc says I'll be fine." "Thanks to you." He paused, studying her face. "Rodriguez told me what you did. That shot you made, that was incredible. I just did what I had to do." "My sister is a nurse back home," Private Martinez said suddenly. "She always talks about helping people, saving lives. But she's never had to kill someone to do it." He looked directly at Sarah. "That must be hard." Sarah felt tears threatening. Nobody had asked her about the emotional cost of what she had done. Everyone focused on the impossible shot, the hidden skills, the mystery of her past. But this young soldier understood something deeper. "It is hard," she admitted. "I became a medic because I was tired of taking lives. I wanted to save them instead. But yesterday you did both, didn't you? You took one life to save many." The simple truth of his words resonated with Sarah. She had been so focused on the contradiction between her two roles that she hadn't seen the harmony. Sometimes saving lives required difficult choices. The next morning brought new challenges. Dr. Harrison approached her during rounds with a serious expression. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what happened. I need to ask you directly. Are you qualified for combat operations?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I have extensive training." "Good, because I've been asked to recommend someone for a special assignment. There's a medical evacuation mission in enemy territory tomorrow. The wounded are trapped behind enemy lines and regular evacuation is impossible." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What kind of mission?" "Small team insertion, high risk. The kind of mission where having someone who can handle both medical emergencies and combat situations would be invaluable." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring again. "Incoming wounded! All medical personnel to stations." The next few hours were a blur of emergency surgery and triage. Sarah worked alongside Dr. Harrison to save a soldier who had stepped on a landmine. The young man's injuries were severe, requiring immediate amputation to save his life. As she assisted with the surgery, Sarah noticed Dr. Harrison watching her work. Her hands were steady, her decisions quick and precise. She had found her rhythm in this strange combination of medical care and military precision. After the surgery, Dr. Harrison pulled her aside. "I've made my decision about the recommendation. I want you on that mission tomorrow. Doctor, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm not sure I'm ready to go back to active combat." "Sarah, in the past week I've watched you save more lives than some medics save in their entire careers. You have skills that could mean the difference between success and failure on this mission." That evening, Sarah found herself in the chapel, a small tent that served as a place of worship for soldiers of all faiths. She wasn't particularly religious, but she needed a quiet place to think. Sergeant Rodriguez found her there, sitting alone in the front row. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Sarah nodded and he sat down beside her. "I heard about the mission tomorrow," he said quietly. "I also heard you're having doubts. I became a medic to save lives, not to go back to war. What if I told you that my brother wasn't the only one you saved yesterday?" Rodriguez turned to face her. "What if I told you that taking out that sniper prevented an entire convoy ambush? Intelligence reports say there were enemy forces positioned all along that route, waiting for the sniper to pin us down." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "I didn't know. By eliminating the sniper, you disrupted their entire plan. 3 medical helicopters were able to evacuate wounded soldiers safely. Approximately 30 lives were saved because of your actions." The weight of this information settled on Sarah's shoulders. She had focused so much on the single life she had taken that she hadn't considered the broader impact of her actions. "Tomorrow's mission is similar," Rodriguez continued. "There are wounded soldiers trapped in enemy territory. Regular evacuation teams can't reach them because of heavy resistance, but a specialized team with the right skills might be able to get through." Sarah closed her eyes, thinking about those trapped soldiers. They were probably scared and in pain, wondering if help would ever come. She thought about Jennifer and Marcus, the medics who had died because they couldn't defend themselves. "How many wounded are trapped?" she asked. 8 confirmed casualties. 3 critical, Sarah made her decision. Standing up, she turned to Rodriguez. Tell Colonel Williams I'll take the assignment. Rodriguez smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. As Sarah walked back to her quarters to prepare for the mission, she realized something important. She wasn't going back to being a soldier. She was becoming something new, a guardian who could heal and protect in equal measure. Tomorrow would test whether she could truly combine both sides of herself into something greater than either alone. Dawn broke gray and cold over the base as Sarah prepared for her first Guardian Angel mission. She stood in the equipment room, methodically checking both her medical supplies and the specialized gear she hadn't touched in 2 years. The familiar weight of tactical equipment felt strange after so long wearing only medical scrubs. Captain Jake Morrison, the team leader, briefed the 5-person rescue unit on their mission parameters. The trapped soldiers were holed up in a bombed-out building 12 miles behind enemy lines. Intelligence suggested light enemy presence, but recent activity indicated the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Matthews will serve as our medic and provide additional security as needed, Captain Morrison explained to the team. The other 3 soldiers, Davis, Chen, and Thompson, looked skeptical. They had heard rumors about the shot she made, but seeing her in person, she still looked like just another medic. Ma'am, no disrespect, said Davis, but this is a high-risk combat operation. Are you sure you're qualified? Before Sarah could answer, Captain Morrison held up a hand. Matthews has been personally recommended by both Colonel Williams and Dr. Harrison. Her qualifications are classified. But trust me when I say she's exactly what we need. The helicopter ride to the insertion point was tense. Sarah reviewed the medical profiles of the trapped soldiers, while the others checked their weapons and equipment. According to intelligence, 2 of the wounded had severe trauma injuries requiring immediate surgery, while the others had various degrees of bullet wounds and shrapnel damage. LZ in sight, called the pilot. 30 seconds. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as they approached the landing zone. Below, the landscape looked like a moonscape, cratered and burned from weeks of heavy fighting. Smoke rose from several buildings in the distance, and she could see the occasional muzzle flash of ongoing skirmishes. They landed hard in a cloud of dust and debris. The team moved quickly away from the helicopter, which lifted off immediately to avoid becoming a target. Sarah followed the others toward a defensive position behind a destroyed wall, her medical pack bouncing against her back. Contact, 2 o'clock, Thompson shouted suddenly. Rifle fire erupted from a building about 300 meters away. The team dove for cover as bullets whined overhead. Sarah pressed herself against the broken concrete, her heart racing. Sniper in the 3rd-floor window, Davis called out. I can't get a clear shot from here. Captain Morrison studied the situation through his binoculars. We need to neutralize that position before we can advance to the target building. Sarah raised her head slightly to assess the threat. Through her scope, she could see the enemy sniper's position clearly. The range was manageable, but the shot would be challenging due to the building's partial collapse creating visual obstructions. I can take him, she said quietly. Negative, Captain Morrison replied. Your primary job is medical support. Another burst of sniper fire forced them all lower. Through her earpiece, Sarah heard the helicopter pilot's voice. Be advised, enemy reinforcements moving toward your position from the north. You have maybe 10 minutes before you're surrounded. The wounded soldiers they were trying to rescue were trapped in a building only 400 meters away, but the sniper made any advance impossible. Sarah could see their situation deteriorating rapidly. Captain, she said firmly, if we don't move soon, we'll lose our window. Those wounded soldiers need immediate medical attention. Morrison looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Take the shot. Sarah moved to a better firing position, her movements smooth and professional. The other team members watched in amazement as she transformed from medic to sniper with practiced ease. She adjusted her scope and controlled her breathing, focusing entirely on the target. The shot echoed across the battlefield. 300 meters away, the enemy sniper's rifle fell silent. Target neutralized, Sarah reported calmly, already slinging her rifle and checking her medical equipment. Let's move. The team advanced quickly toward the target building. As they approached, Sarah could hear calls for help from inside. The building had taken direct hits from artillery, leaving gaping holes in the walls and rubble blocking most entrances. Medic! We need a medic! Someone shouted from inside. Sarah squeezed through a gap in the debris, followed by the rest of the team. Inside, she found a scene of devastation. 8 soldiers were scattered throughout the ruined first floor, some conscious and calling for help, others ominously still. She immediately began triage, quickly assessing each patient's condition. 2 were critical, one with severe abdominal trauma, another with a head injury and internal bleeding. 3 others had serious but stabilizing wounds, while the remaining 3 were walking wounded. "We need immediate evacuation for the critical cases," she told Captain Morrison, while applying pressure to stop bleeding. "The others can wait, but not long." "Enemy movement 1 click north and closing," Davis reported from his watch position. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they're on top of us." Sarah worked frantically to stabilize the most critical patients. The soldier with abdominal trauma was barely conscious, his skin pale and clammy from blood loss. She started an IV and administered emergency medication while simultaneously treating his wounds. "Stay with me," she whispered to the wounded soldier. "Help is coming." But as she worked, enemy fire began striking the building. Bullets whined through the broken windows and chunks of concrete fell from the damaged ceiling. The other team members returned fire, but they were quickly becoming outnumbered. "We need to move now," Morrison shouted over the gunfire. "Can you move the critical patients?" Sarah looked at the 2 most severely wounded soldiers. Moving them in their current condition could kill them, but staying would definitely mean death for everyone. "Give me 2 more minutes," she called back, working desperately to stabilize them enough for transport. The building shook as an explosion went off nearby. Enemy forces were getting closer, and their firepower was increasing. Sarah could hear Morrison coordinating with the extraction helicopter, but the pilot was reporting heavy enemy resistance at the landing zone. "Contact front," Thompson yelled. "They're moving in!" Enemy soldiers were now visible through the building's damaged walls, advancing under cover of heavy weapons fire. The rescue team was trapped with 8 wounded soldiers and no clear escape route. Sarah finished her emergency treatment and grabbed her rifle. She moved to a defensive position while still keeping one eye on her patients. The combination of roles felt natural now. She was protecting her patients the only way she could. "Helicopter inbound, 60 seconds, Morrison announced. But as Sarah looked out at the approaching enemies, she realized 60 seconds might be too long. The wounded soldiers they had come to save were about to become casualties again, along with their entire rescue team. She made a quick decision that would test all her skills and change everything once again. Sometimes being a guardian angel meant fighting like hell to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Sarah positioned herself at a window overlooking the main approach route, where enemy soldiers were advancing. Through her scope, she could count at least 15 hostiles moving in coordinated groups, using the rubble for cover. Behind her, the wounded soldiers lay helpless, depending entirely on the rescue team for survival. "Helicopter 30 seconds out," Morrison announced, but Sarah could see the problem. Enemy fire was intensifying, and the makeshift landing zone was becoming a kill zone. She took careful aim at the lead enemy soldier, a man carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. If he got close enough to use it on the helicopter, everyone would die. The shot was clean and precise. The enemy soldier dropped and his weapon clattered across the rubble. But taking out one threat only revealed how many others remained. "Davis, Chen, watch the left flank," Morrison ordered. "Thompson, cover the rear exit." Sarah continued firing systematically, each shot carefully chosen to maximum impact. She wasn't just shooting to kill, she was disrupting their attack formation, forcing them to take cover and slowing their advance. But ammunition was limited, and the enemy seemed to have endless reinforcements. For every soldier Sarah eliminated, 2 more appeared to take his place. "Medical emergency," one of the wounded soldiers suddenly cried out. "Johnson's bleeding again." Sarah's heart sank. The soldier with abdominal trauma was hemorrhaging internally, probably from the stress of the ongoing battle. She had to choose between continuing to provide fire support and saving a life. Without hesitation, she slung her rifle and rushed to the wounded soldier's side. Blood was pooling beneath him at an alarming rate. Sarah worked quickly to restart his IV and administer emergency clotting medication. "I need pressure here," she called to Morrison, while simultaneously applying direct pressure to the wound. "He's going into shock." Morrison left his firing position to help, leaving the team 1 defender short. Enemy fire immediately intensified as they sensed weakness in the defensive perimeter. "Helicopter on approach." The pilot's voice crackled through their radios. But I'm taking heavy fire. Landing zone is too hot. Sarah looked up from her patient to see tracer rounds streaking past the building where the helicopter was trying to land. The pilot was right. Attempting to land now would be suicide. We need to clear that landing zone, Morrison said grimly. Sarah calculated quickly. The main concentration of enemy fire was coming from two positions: a partially collapsed building about 200 meters to the north, and a cluster of vehicles to the east. Taking out both positions would require precision shooting under extreme pressure. Keep pressure on Johnson's wound, she told Morrison. I'm going to clear the LZ. Sarah, that's a suicide mission. There are too many of them. Not if I'm smart about it. Sarah was already moving toward a different window that would give her angles on both enemy positions. Trust me. The first target was the building to the north. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from multiple windows, indicating at least 4 or 5 shooters. She studied the building's damaged structure and noticed that several floors were barely holding together. Instead of targeting individual soldiers, she aimed for a key support beam that was already cracked from previous artillery damage. Her shot struck exactly where she intended, and the weakened beam gave way. An entire section of the building collapsed, eliminating the threat from that position. Holy shit, Davis breathed. Did you just drop a building with one shot? Sarah was already shifting to target the vehicle cluster. These enemies were better protected, using armored vehicles for cover. But vehicles had weaknesses too: fuel tanks, ammunition stores, and in this case, what appeared to be an improvised explosive device attached to one of the trucks. Her second shot sparked an enormous explosion that took out 3 vehicles and scattered the remaining enemy soldiers. The landing zone was suddenly much quieter. LZ is clear, Morrison announced. Bring us that bird. The helicopter swooped in, its rotors whipping up clouds of dust and debris. Sarah helped load the most critical patients first, working efficiently despite the chaos around them. You need to go, Morrison told her as they loaded the last wounded soldier. Your work here is done. But Sarah was looking back at the building they were leaving. Something felt wrong. Through the smoke and confusion, she could see movement in the shadows. More enemy soldiers approaching from an unexpected direction. Captain, we've got contact from the south. At least a squad moving fast. Morrison cursed and raised his binoculars. Where the hell did they come from? Sarah was already answering that question in her mind. The explosion that had cleared the vehicle cluster must have been visible for miles, drawing additional enemy forces to investigate. They had maybe 2 minutes before the new threat reached effective firing range. Everyone in the helicopter now, Morrison ordered. But as the team began boarding, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. One of the wounded soldiers, barely conscious, was wearing a GPS beacon that was supposed to help rescue teams locate them. If enemy forces captured that beacon, they would have access to classified frequency information that could compromise future rescue operations. Wait, Sarah called out. The beacon. She ran back into the building as enemy fire began striking around the helicopter. The unconscious soldier was lying where they had left him, too severely injured to move but still alive. Sarah checked his equipment and found the beacon still activated. As she worked to remove it safely, enemy soldiers appeared at the building's entrance. Sarah was trapped, too far from the helicopter to make a run for it, but still responsible for protecting classified equipment and wounded soldiers. She made another split-second decision. That would define her role as a guardian angel. Sometimes protecting others meant putting yourself in impossible situations. Drawing her sidearm, Sarah took position between the wounded soldier and the approaching enemies. She had enough ammunition for maybe 30 seconds of fighting. After that, it would come down to hand-to-hand combat. Matthews, get out of there, Morrison's voice crackled through her radio. Negative, Sarah replied calmly. I've got wounded to protect. Through the broken doorway, Sarah could see 3 enemy soldiers advancing cautiously into the building. They moved with military precision, weapons raised and ready. Behind her, the wounded soldier was barely breathing, completely helpless and depending on her protection. Sarah's training kicked in as she assessed the tactical situation. She had limited ammunition, no backup, and was protecting a patient who couldn't be moved. The enemy soldiers had superior numbers and firepower, but they didn't know exactly where she was positioned. She used this advantage, staying low behind a pile of rubble while keeping her weapon trained on the entrance. The first enemy soldier appeared in her sights, moving carefully through the debris. Sarah's shot was clean and silent, dropping him before his companions realized what happened. The other two soldiers immediately took cover and began firing blindly into the building. Bullets ricocheted off concrete and metal, filling the air with deadly fragments. Sarah pressed herself lower, shielding the wounded soldier with her own body. Contact inside the building, one of the enemies shouted in accented English. American soldier, surrender now. Sarah remained silent, knowing that revealing her position would mean death for both her and her patient. She could hear Morrison's voice through her radio, coordinating with the helicopter pilot, but she couldn't respond without giving away her location. The enemy soldiers began advancing more aggressively, firing as they moved. Sarah waited until she had a clear shot at the second soldier, then fired twice in rapid succession. He fell, but not before getting off a burst that came dangerously close to the wounded soldier. Now only one enemy remained, but he was being much more careful. Sarah could hear him moving through the rubble, trying to flank her position. She had maybe 4 rounds left in her pistol, and no way to reload without exposing herself. The wounded soldier behind her made a soft groaning sound, and Sarah realized he was regaining consciousness. She put a finger to her lips, signaling for silence, then whispered in his ear, "Stay still. Help is coming." The soldier's eyes were unfocused, but he managed a small nod. Sarah could see that his condition was deteriorating rapidly. The stress of the firefight was causing his internal bleeding to worsen. He needed immediate medical attention that she couldn't provide while under fire. A shadow moved across the doorway as the remaining enemy soldier tried to get a better angle. Sarah aimed carefully and fired her last 3 rounds. The first 2 missed, but the third found its mark. The enemy soldier stumbled and fell, but Sarah could see he was still moving. Her pistol was empty, and the enemy was wounded but not dead. Sarah looked around desperately for another weapon. The first soldier she had shot was lying near the entrance, his rifle just out of reach. Getting to it would mean leaving the wounded soldier exposed. The decision was made for her when the wounded enemy soldier raised his weapon toward her patient. Sarah launched herself across the open space, tackling the enemy just as he fired. The shot went wide, but now she was locked in hand-to-hand combat with a desperate soldier. The fight was brutal and quick. Sarah's medical training had taught her anatomy, and she used that knowledge to her advantage. A precise strike to a nerve cluster in his neck ended the threat permanently. Breathing hard, Sarah grabbed the enemy's rifle and checked the entrance for more threats. The building was quiet except for the distant sound of helicopter rotors. Through her radio, she could hear Morrison calling her name. Matthews, respond. "What's your status?" "Building secure," Sarah replied, rushing back to check on her patient. "But I need immediate medical evacuation. Patient is critical." The wounded soldier was now fully conscious but very weak. Sarah worked quickly to stabilize his bleeding while monitoring his vital signs. His pulse was rapid and weak, indicating severe blood loss. "Stay with me," she told him while applying fresh bandages. "The helicopter is coming back for us." You saved my life," the soldier whispered. "That's what medics do," Sarah replied. But even as she said it, she realized how much her role had evolved. She wasn't just a medic anymore, and she wasn't just a soldier. She was something new, a protector who could heal and fight in equal measure. Through the window, she could see the helicopter circling back toward their position. Morrison's voice came through the radio again. "LZ is clear, coming in hot for pickup." Sarah prepared the wounded soldier for transport, knowing that the next few minutes would be critical for his survival. As she worked, she reflected on how much had changed since that first shot she had made to save the convoy. Each mission had pushed her further from her original goal of being just a medic, but had brought her closer to understanding what she was truly meant to be. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust, and Morrison appeared at the building entrance with Chen providing cover. Together, they carefully moved the wounded soldier to the aircraft. "Nice work in there," Morrison said as they secured the patient for transport. "I heard the fighting." "How many?" 3 hostiles neutralized, Sarah reported professionally. "Patient stable for transport but needs immediate surgery." As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah looked down at the battlefield below. The mission had been successful. All 8 wounded soldiers were now safe and receiving medical care. But the cost had been high, and Sarah knew that each mission was pushing her further into a role she hadn't expected. Dr. Harrison was waiting at the base when they landed. He helped transfer the critical patient directly to surgery, while Sarah gave him a quick briefing on the medical situation. "Excellent work," he told her after the patient was in surgery. "Your actions saved his life." But Sarah was thinking about more than just medical success. During the mission, she had killed 5 enemy soldiers to protect wounded patients. Each death had been necessary, justified by the lives she was saving, but the weight of those decisions was accumulating. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters writing her mission report. How do you explain that being a medic sometimes requires taking lives? How do you reconcile the oath to do no harm with the reality of protecting those who cannot protect themselves? A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Colonel Williams entered, carrying the familiar red folder that meant another classified assignment. "The Guardian Angel program has been fast-tracked for expansion," he said without preamble. "Your performance today proved that the concept works. We're building an entire unit around people like you." Sarah looked at the folder, knowing that accepting it would mean fully embracing this dual role she had stumbled into. "People like me?" she asked. "People who understand that sometimes the best way to save lives is to take them first," Williams replied. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Sarah opened the red folder with trembling hands. Inside were orders that would change not just her life, but the entire military medical corps. The Guardian Angel program was being expanded into a full operational unit, and she was being promoted to lead the training program for combat medics with specialized skills. "Congratulations, Captain Matthews," Colonel Williams said, emphasizing her new rank. "You're going to train the next generation of Guardian Angels." The promotion felt surreal. Just weeks ago, she had been a simple medic trying to hide her past. Now she was being asked to create an entirely new type of soldier, medical professionals who could save lives and take them with equal skill. "How many recruits?" she asked, scanning the documents. "Initial class of 12. All volunteers with medical training and combat experience. They'll come from various branches: Army medics, Navy corpsmen, Air Force pararescue specialists. Your job is to teach them how to integrate both skill sets effectively." Sarah thought about the psychological challenges these recruits would face. Learning to kill in order to heal wasn't something any medical school prepared people for. The moral weight of those decisions had nearly broken her own resolve several times. "They'll need psychological support," she said. "What we're asking them to do goes against everything they learned in medical training." Already arranged. Dr. Sarah Chen will be joining the program as a full-time psychiatrist. She specializes in military trauma and ethical conflicts. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of her new training facility, a specialized compound that combined medical simulation labs with tactical training ranges. The 12 recruits were waiting for her, and she could see the mixture of curiosity and skepticism in their eyes. "I know what you're thinking," she began, addressing the group. "You became medics to save lives, not to take them. I thought the same thing once." She told them about her journey from sniper to medic to Guardian Angel, sharing the moral struggles and difficult decisions she had faced. Several recruits nodded in understanding. They had volunteered for this program because they had experienced similar conflicts. "The reality is simple," Sarah continued. "Sometimes the only way to protect your patients is to eliminate threats to their safety. We're not changing your mission as medics. We're expanding your ability to fulfill it." The training program was intense and comprehensive. Mornings were spent in medical simulations, treating traumatic injuries under stress, making triage decisions in chaotic environments, and performing emergency surgery in field conditions. Afternoons focused on tactical skills, marksmanship, close combat, reconnaissance, and coordination with special forces teams, but the most challenging part was the psychological integration. Dr. Chen worked with each recruit individually to help them reconcile their roles as healers and protectors. Some struggled more than others with the moral implications. "I became a medic because I believe in the sanctity of life," said Sergeant Maria Rodriguez during one group session. "How do I reconcile that with taking lives?" "By understanding that all lives are sacred," Sarah replied, "including the lives of your patients. When you eliminate a threat to wounded soldiers, you're protecting innocent lives. The math is clear. One life taken to save many lives protected." After 6 weeks of training, the first test came. Intelligence reported that a medical convoy had been ambushed in a remote valley. Regular rescue forces couldn't reach them due to heavy enemy resistance, but the new Guardian Angel unit could be deployed for their first operational mission. Sarah briefed her team on the situation. 8 wounded soldiers were trapped in 2 vehicles, surrounded by an estimated 20 enemy fighters. The terrain was difficult with limited landing zones and multiple defensive positions for the enemy. "This is exactly what we trained for," she told her team. Medical evacuation under fire with active threat neutralization. The insertion went smoothly, but as they approached the ambush site, it became clear that the situation was worse than intelligence had indicated. The enemy had fortified their positions and was using the trapped convoy as bait to draw in rescue forces. "Multiple snipers in the ridgeline," reported Staff Sergeant Jackson, one of Sarah's best tactical medics. "They've got overlapping fields of fire covering the entire valley." Sarah assessed the situation through her scope. The trapped convoy was visible about 600 meters ahead, but reaching it would require crossing open ground under fire from at least 4 confirmed sniper positions. "Rodriguez, Jen, work your way around to the east ridge," Sarah ordered. "Take out the sniper positions from that side. Jackson, Williams, you're with me on a direct approach. We'll suppress the western positions while the medical team reaches the convoy." The coordinated attack began at Sarah's signal. Her team moved with precision, each member seamlessly transitioning between medical and combat roles as the situation demanded. Rodriguez eliminated 2 snipers with clean shots while simultaneously directing Chen to provide medical support for a wounded convoy member. Sarah herself took out the most dangerous threat, a sniper with a clear shot at the trapped medics. The 800-meter shot was challenging due to wind conditions, but her training and experience made it manageable. "Threats neutralized," she reported. "Medical team moved to the convoy." The evacuation proceeded efficiently, with each guardian angel taking responsibility for specific patients while maintaining security. They treated wounds, stabilized critical cases, and coordinated helicopter evacuation, all while under intermittent enemy fire. The mission was a complete success. All 8 trapped soldiers were evacuated safely, and the Guardian Angel team suffered no casualties. But more importantly, the concept had been proven in combat conditions. Back at base, Colonel Williams debriefed the team personally. "Outstanding work," he said. "You've proven that the Guardian Angel concept is viable. This mission will be used as a template for expanding the program military-wide." Sarah felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that she hadn't experienced since her sniper days. But it was different now, deeper and more meaningful. She was saving lives not just by eliminating threats, but by creating a new generation of protectors who could do both. That evening, Dr. Chen approached her with the psychological evaluation results for the team. "They're handling the integration remarkably well," she reported. "Better than I expected, actually. I think your leadership and personal example made the difference." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "You showed them that it's possible to maintain your identity as a healer while accepting the responsibility of being a protector. That's not an easy balance, but you've achieved it." 6 months later, Sarah stood before a graduation ceremony for the 3rd class of Guardian Angels. The program had expanded to include 50 active operatives, with requests coming in from every theater of operations. The success rate for medical evacuations in hostile territory had improved by over 300%. As she watched the new graduates receive their certifications, Sarah reflected on how far she had come from that frightened medic who had picked up a rifle to save wounded soldiers. She had found her true calling not in choosing between healing and fighting, but in understanding that sometimes they were the same thing. The ceremony concluded with the Guardian Angel motto that Sarah had written herself: "To heal the wounded, protect the innocent, and stand guard over those who cannot stand for themselves." She had started as just a medic, hidden her skills as a sniper, and finally emerged as something greater than either, a Guardian Angel who proved that sometimes the most powerful way to save lives was to be willing to take them in defense of others. The perfect shot that had started her journey was just the beginning of a mission that would continue for years to come.